Here we are at episode 10, and in this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about the events that surrounded my grandpa and Troy. So when we were dating, Troy was really a different person. He was very, very caring, and with my family too. He was at our house all the time. And here's the little things that made me think that he was just like absolutely caring and wonderful. My grandpa had a Bible study with the gentleman that I talked about in the previous episode, who I call Sam in the podcast. And Sam was like a son to my grandpa, and my grandpa just loved him. He was a very nice guy, but sadly more of a follower of the organization than like loving and kind in some aspects. But anyways, so Sam had his study at his house with my grandpa, and because my grandpa was really getting up in age, I started driving my grandpa so he didn't have to drive over like the interstate. And that was fine. We had like this thing going where I would go on the study with him, loved it, loved spending time with my grandpa. Well, I was dating Troy at the time, and I was just really sick, really, really sick. And my grandpa, he still wanted to go on the study, and I was just gonna, take him but not feel well and stay in the car. So, you know how we do everything for the organization, everything, your personal health comes last, basically. But Troy, who didn't live really that close to us, said, you know what, I'm going to come after work, and then you stay home and rest, and I'll take Grandpa. And it just touched my heart. I thought, oh, that is just super nice. So he came and he took my grandpa on the study, and I'm like, what a caring guy. I could stay home, and it wasn't even like to spend time with me. It was just to be nice. And I'm like, that's super, super sweet. And like I will say, throughout the marriage, he would do this kind of stuff where it was like extra nice, and I thought, aw, he's so nice. And then then he would do some stuff that was awful, or abusive. So it's kind of like almost like two people sometimes. But definitely while we were dating, those extra nice things happened more often. So one day Troy was out preaching with us, and we went out as a group, as a family, and he went door to door with my grandpa, and he introduced my grandpa at the door to like the house owner. This is my grandpa, and my grandpa just melted. Like, he was so touched by this. He thought that was just the sweetest thing, and he felt like, this is so nice. Like, I really like this guy that she brought home and all this stuff. So, they were really touched. Well, once we got married, even though eventually my grandpa and mom lived really close to us, he kind of stopped visiting, stopped hanging out, really stopped talking to my grandpa. And my grandpa, he had a presence. He was very intelligent, and he was an elder for a long time. And I need to probably tell Grandpa's story a little bit too, to just like lay out the character that he was, like, or the character that he had. So my grandpa, he grew up, and his mother was put in the concentration camp because she had Jehovah's Witness literature, which was banned at that time. And my great-grandma, his mother, this story is so wild, really. So she wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. She was just reading the literature from the neighbors. And they put them all in the concentration camp. Well, as a Jehovah's Witness, you were able to sign a paper and kind of forfeit your religion and all that. And you could say, I no longer want to be a Jehovah's Witness, and then you could just go home. So they had kind of like a unique situation during World War II, where if they signed something, they could go home. And the neighbors who gave my great-grandma the literature, they signed the piece of paper and came home. Well, my great-grandma, she didn't sign that piece of paper. And overnight, the first night, I think you went to jail first, like for processing, and then you were sent to the concentration camp. They were going to put her in solitary confinement, but for some reason, and at the time we thought that was Jehovah's doing, the door opened and this Jehovah's Witness sister got like pushed into the cell with her. And that for her was like her, at the time I thought faith strengthening, now I think undoing, so to speak, because she just talked to my great-grandma all night long and basically preached to her. And so by morning, my great-grandma was not going to sign any papers. She was just going to go to the concentration camp and take it. So the neighbors had come home, and my great-grandpa, who had like no affiliation with the J-Dubs, was kind of mad. Like, his wife wasn't coming home. They had a kid. Like, what's happening? And my great-grandma was actually gone for 7 years. She didn't see my grandpa, her son, grow up. She was, concentration camp and then forced labor till they were freed. But at the same time, we had like this history, this deep Jehovah's Witness history, like we're generations in at this point. And, the great-grandma was in the concentration camp because of this. And my grandpa, he actually went searching for his mom after the war and found her, and then ended up, okay, so I need to give people names probably so it makes more sense. But when my great-grandma was released, she didn't know where to go. They didn't have the internet. They didn't know where all their family members were. They were scattered. And she was in a completely different area where anybody was. She didn't know anybody. But you have your group, the Jehovah's Witnesses, so you find people right away, right? And so this lady, let's call her Lucy said, okay, you're a sister, you can live with me. I'll take you in till you find your family. So Lucy and my great-grandma lived together, and my grandpa found his mother eventually. I don't know how much time had passed, but he found her, and then met Lucy and thought, oh, I am in love with this girl. Lucy was like, well, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. I don't even look at people who aren't. And she did start like preaching to my grandpa. Well, guess what? My grandpa then joined the Jehovah's Witnesses, and he really took it seriously. He was all about it. He did everything. So him and Lucy married, and that became my grandma then. And they pioneered for a long time, and then Lucy was already like getting a little bit older, and I'm so glad my grandparents really didn't take that, like the Jehovah's Witnesses not wanting children. It was kind of like an unspoken rule that you need to serve God and do more for the congregation, and they did. They pioneered post-war. My grandpa brought 100 people in, which at the time I thought was so noble, and now I'm just like, oh no, that's really like awful. He studied the Bible and like recruited 100 people basically, but he was such an intelligent person and so nice. So people were drawn to him and his personality, and it was like a beautiful thing. I loved going on studies with him because I always felt like I learned so much from him. And I think the fact that he bought it all also made it like worse for us as a family, because any question you had, he could explain it. Like, and he was so smart that we all were like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. He was just a really good speaker. Like when he gave a talk, it was fun. You really sat there and you like learned, and you're like, oh, this is really fun. He made it fun. And he really didn't abide by hardcore rule. He was chill. Also, probably because he was a reader. So some things just didn't really make sense to him. And like when the organization was very like regimented in things, he wasn't. He was so chill. Like my mom wanted to wear pants to the assembly, and there's like literally a picture of him as an elder and my mom wearing pants, and like nice pants, but he just didn't see anything wrong with women wearing pants, because why shouldn't they? You know, there's no Bible scripture in that. So eventually, after several years of marriage, my grandma was getting older, and Grandpa said, I think I want to go to Australia and help where the need is greater. And, you know, anything for the organization. So Grandma and Grandpa started making plans to move to Australia to preach there. Well, Grandma at the same time also got pregnant. And so they ended up going, but they had to wait a little bit till the delivery, and then they went. And they went with twins. They had twins, and already getting up in age, but very adventurous people. So they moved to Australia, and the plan was to get his parents over too. But you know, my great grandma, the war took a toll on her, being in the concentration camp. I mean, it's really kind of amazing that she survived all that. Plus, she wasn't super healthy, but she did. She survived it. And actually, here's a funny little side story. She got baptized in the concentration camp in a big pot that they cooked the potatoes in. That was her baptism. And then, like, later on, they kind of made her get baptized again because a brother didn't baptize her, but like a sister that was anointed. It's just a weird story. So she had to get rebaptized. So weird, whatever. But anyways, the plan was to get my great-grandparents over to Australia, and they just couldn't do it. And so then Grandma and Grandpa felt like, well, in Australia, we're just so far away from Europe. We need to at least move a little bit closer. We'll move, and we'll go to a city in the United States on the East Coast. So they moved there. He got a good job, a really good job, and they just did not like that city. So I think had they like moved around a little bit and found a good fit for them, it would have been good. But they just were like, let's just go back, and we'll be back in Europe with the family. And so they did. They moved back, and then they did everything they could there. They helped build a Kingdom Hall. We actually, growing up, lived right next to the Kingdom Hall because my grandpa donated the property, built the Kingdom Hall, and then built a house for him. This is also around the time that 1975 happened. So a lot of people were in like Armageddon fever, hardcore. And there's an incident that happened where I kind of think it kind of explains Grandpa's personality as like an independent thinker or a critical thinker that didn't buy like everything that the organization itself said. So he built a house, and meanwhile people were selling stuff, or you know, they thought like Armageddon's coming tomorrow, you know, why are you buying a house? Very judgmental. And my mom's in the back seat of the car, Grandma and Grandpa driving, and my grandma said something about 1975 and how it's imminent and Armageddon is coming or something like that. And Grandpa's like, we don't even know that, because we don't know. That says in the Bible that nobody knows, so we don't know anything about 1975. And Grandma said, you need to be careful what you're saying. You're going to be disfellowshipped for speaking like that. Because it was basically speaking against what the organization was teaching at the same time. And my mom said she was in the back seat, and she kind of like listened up like, that's weird, you know, because isn't Grandpa right? We don't know. And so she kind of learned to like not always buy everything the organization was buying. And like how I would explain my family's like, they were more like Bible people over organization people, which got them in a lot of trouble over the years. Because if something didn't like correlate, they would say something, or they would speak out, and they're like, that doesn't make sense. And then, you know, they would be treated accordingly by the congregation, because you're basically not following the rules. One of those incidents, so as my grandpa was getting up in age, there was an incident in Australia where a sister, a Jehovah's Witness sister, was married to a not Jehovah's Witness person, a worldly person, so to speak. That's what they call them. And he was an army person. And she got a job on base as a cross guard, helping kids cross to the elementary school on base. And my grandpa didn't see anything wrong with that because she's not really doing anything with the army. She's helping kids. It is a paycheck from the army, though, and Jehovah's Witnesses take that very seriously. So, like, Bethel apparently wrote and said she has to quit her job and work somewhere else. And my grandpa was kind of upset about this because this was such a burden for her. Her husband wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. He's going to think we're nuts for, like, making her quit her job because her paycheck comes from the army. And now she had to drive, like, pretty far for her job. He just didn't think that makes sense. Well, fast forward, he's an elder in a congregation. And he just felt like you gotta measure with the same criteria for every case. You don't get to, like, treat one quote-unquote lowly woman, who's at the bottom of the ranks one way, but then if it's like a prominent elder who has money, you treat him differently. Grandpa was like, either the rule applies or it doesn't apply. And there was a family that had a business, and they contracted out to this mega church in town, like mega church. And not only was their paycheck coming from that mega church, while this the elder, who was wealthy, was working on the church, his employees, who were also mostly Jehovah's Witnesses, they had to wear, like, hard hats with crosses on them. And again, I'm saying, like, none of this right now, like, it doesn't matter. Who cares? You can do whatever you want to. But at the time when you're a Jehovah's Witness and everyone is being measured with a certain standard, then it needs to be uniform. And with this guy, they didn't care. They were like, well, and another brother and my grandpa were like, no, it's like either everybody is getting treated the same, but not like special treatment for this brother. And here's a little side fact, like, this brother hand delivered a big check to Bethel. I believe it's Brother Loesch he's buddies with. So he was definitely in cahoots. So how are they gonna, like, say, yeah, this isn't right, And the whole thing was just so much drama. And my grandpa was just so confused. He's like, okay, so they made the sister quit her job, but then this guy can take a whole contract from a mega church and get paid and work in the church with crosses on your hard head. It was just really confusing to him. And everyone kind of was friends and family too. So for him saying, this is weird, it put him on this blacklist. And, now that I'm out, I think, like, all that is just, all of it is so goofy. You work wherever you want to work. You do whatever you want to do. But at the time, as a Jehovah's Witness, and you see people be treated in two different ways, I do understand his thinking at the time. And he was always like, okay, it was just so weird. And he was just like, I need to move out of this congregation because everyone's, like, nepotism, everyone's friends and family, and there's a lot of money involved and stuff. And when he moved, they sent a letter with him to the new congregation that at the time Grandpa didn't see yet, but basically now he was blacklisted in the area. I don't even think if he had moved away from the area it would have helped, because your letter follows you and you don't know what it says in that file, in that letter. So that letter followed him, and he just couldn't shake it, and they didn't appoint him as an elder again. And here he's like, he was a really good man. He was such a good man. And he was just so confused. He's like, I gave my whole life. Like, I've worked so hard. But I think it's also like in old age, they don't want you. They want young people. They need the younger people. As you age, you're not that useful to a cult. And I was reading James Patterson's book, Professor James Patterson, and it was enlightening a little bit, because I felt like Grandpa, who got himself an education while he was a Jehovah's Witness and had a degree and a really good job, and he owned a house and he owned a business and all this, I think they hated him for that. I think they don't want that. And it always felt like people were really kind of mean to him. The upper ranks were, not the lower rank. The publishers, he was so cool with all the publishers. They all loved him. But it was like the other elders. It almost seemed like they were really rude to him. And James Patterson, Professor James Patterson, in his book, he says that the organization does not want intelligent people or people with professions. They don't want that. And so that kind of proved true. It just always felt like Grandpa suffered kind of like for having a good job and for having a nice house and all this, but whatever. So he basically wasn't appointed again. And for him, especially not understanding why, he had all these hours in service. He had a Bible study and he was diligent. He was one of those rare people who actually liked going out in service, preaching basically. And he had that Bible study. Well, he couldn't shake this bad rep. And he ended up, hang on a second, I have to collect my thoughts. He ended up moving to another congregation again. And the elder in that congregation actually read him the letter, let him see the letter, the file that was following him. And I don't even really know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, because maybe it's not good for us to see the things that people write. But it's so crazy, because if an elder likes you, he will write something nice about you. If he doesn't like you, he can write anything in there, and they did. They wrote that there's no way my grandpa could really have all the hours, and that he's probably lying. And he's lying about his hours. And at the end of her life, my grandma, she ended up being diagnosed with cancer, and she still went on this study with Sam. She loved it, so for her, that was like preaching was their life. It's that older generation. And they actually wrote in the letter that they think that like my grandma, she was lying about her hours, because there's no way that she, as a cancer patient, would even put in all these hours. And it was so hurtful. So later, Sam, he became a baptized brother, and he actually ended up being an elder. And he was interviewed at the convention, and my grandpa saw him interviewed, and he said, there's the study that they said I lied about. Now he's on stage. But it just, all that stuff, all those things, they just crushed my grandparents. Because I can tell you one thing, they never lied about their hours. They actually had a lot of hours. Like, preaching was their life. They're from that old block that just did those things. So that was really hurtful. And the older he got, I think the worse he was treated. By the time my grandma died, no one even came from the congregation. She was in the hospital, and the Catholic priest came and asked if she wanted him to pray with her, since he sees no one else is visiting her from her church. And my grandma, who was actually born as a Catholic and then became a Jehovah's Witness in younger years, she was just crushed. Like, I can't even believe this. And how nice of that Catholic priest. Like, you are better off being Catholic, because they have a really good community sometimes. Some of the this priest was caring. None of our elders was. So anyway, so that was kind of like the character of my grandpa. And they had gone through so much over the years, especially because of the Jehovah's Witnesses. He ended up having like a series of mini strokes at one point because of all this junk that happened. And I have to honestly say, if he had not had this religion, he would have been like a very successful business person that put all his time and effort into his business. And he probably would have been loaded because, I mean, he was fine and he was probably better off than a lot of witnesses since he did get an education, but he didn't put all his like energy in savings because, you know, they didn't think they needed retirement and all this. So what a bummer. Anyways, I do think all those things toward the end of my grandpa's life contributed to him really starting to think about the quote-unquote truth, because he would say things to us and we were still in it. Plus, he raised us in this cult, and so we were just really confused by his little comments. But he said, like, what if 1914 isn't like correct? What if that's wrong? And my mom was just like, what do you mean? Like, what? If that's wrong, then like everything doesn't, like, then it's all wrong. What? And then as he progressed getting older, he had the book from Rutherford, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, and he would just like wave it at mom in the air, like, check this out, and mom was just like, this is so weird. And my mom, she had always wanted to read the older literature from the Jehovah's Witnesses, but they keep you so busy with new stuff that she never found the time. Because when you really start looking at this old stuff, it's freaking weird. I never knew that we believed in pyramids and, you know, all this crazy stuff they talked about. So, you know, like, there's another planet that Jehovah's on, and the faithful dead like Abraham will come, and they will come to Rutherford's mansion in San Diego. I mean, just all this crazy stuff. We did not know it. But I remember one time when we started getting the library online, I was really excited. And because what I would do is I liked kind of looking into some other articles and stuff. And so, you know, if we studied the Watchtower, it's so boring sometimes. But I'm like, let's put some meat on these bones and do some like history add-ons or something. I like that. Like, I love history. And I said to one of the elders, I'm so excited that they're putting the whole library online, because hopefully they'll put all the older stuff on there and I can read it. And the elder said to me, they will never do that. And I was really confused, like, why? What? Why? And why did he say that? Why did he say, like, they will never do it? Because the truth is they don't. And that's a big question for Jehovah's Witnesses. How come the older books aren't online? Like, if you're an active Jehovah's Witness, how come they're not online? Well, the answer is because they're wacky, like completely wacky. And we think that, like, one guy at Bethel was like Pimo or something, but Grandpa received 2 DVDs one day. And the one was a talk by a governing body member, and the other one was the photo drama of creation that they talk about so much at meetings. And my grandpa had never seen it, so he was excited. So he put the DVD on. Guess what? Pull it up on YouTube, because I'm sure it's on YouTube by now. It is freaking weird. He was just kind of shocked. He's like, this is what they always talk about, is so amazing. It's so weird. And then he watched the talk by the governing body member. And in that talk, the governing body, and I think it was Loesch, he talked about, you know, like in paradise, when all the people die, we who stayed on the paradise earth have to clean up the dead bodies. Tell me. That's so crazy. That's the craziest. First of all, speculation. Second of all, I mean, how is that a paradise? That's like a horror freak show. And my grandpa was just stunned. So But what do? Your kids are in this. You've raised them in this. You can't really raise questions anymore. I really think he just was so frustrated at the end, and he probably kind of figured out it was all baloney. And I feel sad. This episode's getting really long, so I'm going to make it a 2-parter because there's more to come about the funeral. And I will talk about that tomorrow.